In 1337, a conflict between the British and the French kicked off called the 100 Years' War. Now, there's only really two things you need to know about this war. One, the war was actually 116 years long. And two, we lost. But thankfully, Paradox is sponsoring me today to show off the new war mechanics in Victoria 3. And I thought, what better way to show off the game than reigniting the 100 Years' War with the French. Starting the game off as the British, you can see we have a few advantages, like already owning a large portion of the world, a somewhat educated population, and a progressive set of laws, all backed up by an already industrialized economy with access to enough coal to do irreversible environmental damage, which is good. Now, before we can bully the French, let's talk about some of the basics of the game. In the top left, we have our various mana points: bureaucracy, authority, influence, convoys, and the most important thing, money. Money is pretty much what this game is all about. You need money to build buildings, fund your government, and even pay out welfare. But how do you actually get more money? Well, a few ways is by raising taxes, using authority to implement consumption taxes on certain goods, or lowering government spending. Now that's raked in a few pennies, but I had another little trick up my sleeve. By nationalising the railway industry, we, the government, get to take a cut of the profits. However, because the cost of transportation is incredibly low right now, we are technically losing money on our investment. But by forcing all of our mines to transport their goods via the railroad instead of using labourers, this will drive up the demand for transportation, which then drives up the price, and since the building was government run, we get to pocket the extra change. With a strong amount of cash flow now rolling in at the expense of thousands of newly unemployed labourers, it was time to bypass Victoria 3's complex economy, as I have found that following this simple diagram works quite well. At the top is a question you should ask yourself at the start of each year. If you answered yes, then it's time to build some more construction industries. If you answered no, then it's time to build some more industrial buildings. As we were clearly making money, I placed down some new construction industry, used some authority to throw down some decrees, picked our research, and then moved on to more important things like the French. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't really take on the French right now in a fair fight, as one, their army was much bigger than ours, and second, we had some other upcoming issues in China to resolve. But there were a few things we could do in the meantime to screw them over. For example, we embargoed them and then began inviting the surrounding nations into our market. This will cut the French off from trading with any of these nations since we own their markets now. I also got an alliance with Portugal because this was going to help us with our little upcoming issue. Around this period of time, the British were funneling large amounts of opium into China, which was having a devastating effect on the country. So naturally, China tried to ban opium, and to cut a long story short, we said no. This led to there being 2 Opium Wars, which we were going to have to fight in this game. So to prepare, I started off by reorganizing the many small armies I had into 3 large armies: the Homeland Army, the Irish Army, and the Indian Army. I began expanding our army by building about 60 barracks in Scotland, and after a short period of time, our army grew from 145 battalions to over 200. Now, with a majority of our front line made up with angry Scots with mobile artillery, I believed it was time to declare war on the Qing. Now, to complete this journal entry, we had to own a treaty port, which begs the question, what is a treaty port? Basically, by following this diagram, you can see that a treaty port equals cash, because we get to bypass any tariffs or embargoes a nation puts on you. So I thought I'd keep things historical and pick the city of Hong Kong, which is conveniently right next to the Portuguese, who were my allies, which I thought they would come to my aid in the upcoming war without hesitation. Nope. Portugal instead demanded that they would only join the war if I gave them the entire province of Guangdong. Guangdong currently had 12 million people living inside it, while Portugal as an entire nation had 6. Sure, I guess? As the diplomatic play progressed, it was obvious that no one was going to aid the Chinese, so I thought I'd demand some war reparations for good measure. And to no one's surprise, a band of poor Chinese farmers were no match for our elite mobile artillery. With a nearly 10-to-1 kill rate in every battle, it's safe to say the entire Chinese army was currently tied up with getting their asses kicked. To capitalize on this, I sent the Irish army to navally invade Beijing, and this sparked a majority of the Chinese army to quickly relocate north. Look at all the Chinese armies moving. Look at them all. They're running north. Look at them run. With their peasant army now divided, this was a perfect opportunity for our boy General John to launch our assault in the south. With both Hong Kong and Beijing secured, the Chinese surrendered. Look at the Portuguese population! And our very profitable opium trade continued to flow. Now, tariff-free, which basically meant more money for my opium farmers. China, on the other hand, got a massive debuff, which sucks for them, I suppose. With our treaty port in China secured, it was time to continue securing our other global interests, mainly South Africa, as these three provinces down here, but primarily these two, are rich in coal, iron, and gold. So I sent the Irish down to do some swift negotiations with the natives, which led to us annexing the three nations. The rest of the region I was going to have to colonize. However, because of a few spicy mosquitoes, I had to research something called quinine. Quinine. With our aggressive expansion wrapped up for now, it was time to focus on oneself. We built some new coal mines, expanded our industrial buildings, built railways, universities, and even the Big Ben.
Ding.
We also implemented some progressive laws like a private healthcare system and a secret police force. And after just 3 years of progress, our GDP had grown to 57 million, while the French only had a pitiful 37 million. While I was patting myself on the back for my excellent economy building skills, the Prussians decided to launch a unification play for Germany, which opened up a brilliant opportunity for me to attack the French. So I launched my own diplomatic play to reclaim the rightful territories of Normandy, Gascony, and the liberation of Brittany. During the play, the French managed to garner support from the Americans and the Prussians, which I countered by bringing in the Spanish and the East Indian Company. Now, we were going to be slightly outnumbered in this war, but I wasn't too worried, as I was hoping to bog the Americans down in Canada, and Prussia was currently being ravaged by half of Europe. The first battles began along the Spanish border, where we sat on a mountain and rained artillery fire down on them. I then sent the Irish army to navally invade Brittany, and after a couple more victories on the battlefield, we managed to link the two front lines. Now, I did kind of forget that Canada was a thing, but the war was going well for us, as our boy General John, a Scottish veteran from the Opium Wars, who was an experienced offensive planner, was smashing the French in every battle. And before long, we had occupied a majority of France. Their allies started to abandon them, and it was only a matter of time before they capitulated, and France looked like this. The defeat of the French was glorious. Now, I'll admit, I was missing a certain Calais, but that was okay, because my next goal was to conquer the entire French coast. For now, though, it was time for a little bit of economic development on our side. A very lucrative business for me so far has been trading with the Chinese. I'd been importing their cheap silk and fabric and then exporting the clothes I made back to them. This was incredibly profitable for me and my population, as the capitalists in charge of our textile mills were currently the richest men in the country. And what was even better was the fact I didn't have any of my own plantations, which meant no stinky aristocrats to deal with. Now, money might be the most important resource in the game, but the second is population. So when I looked over at the population graph and noticed I had consumed over 1 million Spanish men, I was very happy. In fact, the Spanish had actually infested every part of my empire, from the homelands to Ireland, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Normandy, Canada, Kenya, Cameroon. They were fucking everywhere. Which led to a slight problem. We had so many uneducated Spaniards arriving, it was actually driving down my literacy rate, which then lowered my innovation, which simply means less research. However, even though I was slowly consuming the Spanish population, the Spanish population is actually depleting because they're all emigrating to my country. I needed more, as many of our industries were suffering from a lack of employment. However, thanks to some technological advances I made, I was able to give my coal mines access to dynamite, which increased the output of coal significantly. And with my large increase of coal production, I was able to replace my need for labourers thanks to something called a water tube boiler. And with our labour shortages solved, our GDP tipped over the 100k mark, which I thought was a good indication that it was time to attack the French again. With the world currently occupied with the formation of the Italian nation, it was once again time to jump the French. This time, I set the war goal to release the nation of Occitania, primarily because I wanted to continue removing the French access to the coast, and I also wanted that sweet, sweet silk they produced. so that I could continue to build up my clothing empire, which at this point, I was now producing the most clothes in the world and flooding everyone's market with them. Before I started the war though, I thought I'd give my army the edge by giving my soldiers some extra rations and some morale boosting supplements. With my soldiers now dosed up on chocolate and opium, I started the diplomatic play and was expecting a few people to jump in against me, like the Prussians, Russians, or even the Austrians. Not the Mexicans, Moroccans, and the Chinese. Yeah, it seemed that China had had enough of us pilfering off their economy, but it's fine because as long as I didn't lose Hong Kong, I wouldn't have an issue. Well, fuck. Oh no, my GDP just dropped by like 4 million. With Hong Kong being occupied, our treaty port was no longer active. Our clothing industry was now unprofitable thanks to the huge increase in silk price, and all our trade routes were now cancelled. But unfortunately for the French, that's all the Chinese did. So it didn't take us too long to break through the French's lines and occupy Paris. With Occitania released, I was able to hoover them up into my market, which gave me access to their silk deposits and their population, who all immediately began migrating to the homelands because turns out southern France was a little bit of a dump. After the war, I did some rapid industrial expansion, which began to develop a couple of issues for me. One, I was still consuming Spanish people at an alarming rate, which was still tanking my education. And we also started to suffer from the effects of pollution. Now currently, both our education and healthcare systems were private, meaning basically, if you're not rich, you're not welcome. The way to solve this was to give access to these institutions to everyone. However, with our government primarily run by capitalists and the only group that would support such a bill being a marginalized group, we had to find a way to shift the power from the wealthy to the people. And to do this, I gave everyone the vote. And immediately after, the Trade Union Party won the election by a landslide. This helped me push through some much needed reform. Oh yeah, and the Queen died. We got a public healthcare system to help counter the effects of pollution, and finally got through a public education system alongside compulsory primary school education. And finally, we were able to begin educating the nearly, 30 million people I had consumed at this point. However, because the public healthcare system raised the standard of living for everyone now, this raised the nation's migration attraction, and everyone began piling into our country. We had mass migration from Chile, Albania, Denmark, and so many more. All these people were immediately put to work in our textile mills and coal mines. And for the French, well, at this point, it was just a little bit embarrassing for them. So, I declared another war on them, and within a few months, it was over. And I had completely isolated the French from the world. With no ports, France was now unable to interact with the global market, aside from a few land trade routes. And as a result of this, the country fell into economic ruin. Their standard of living dropped, their GDP collapsed, and France had to begin shutting down all their factories and switch to an agrarian economy just to feed their population. We, on the other hand, were having a great time. Our economy grew, our population became wealthier, and we even discovered electricity. We also researched malaria prevention and began consuming Africa, in which I just turned into a massive tea plantation because, British things. And after about 15 years of progress, there was only one thing left to do. Let France have a communist revolution, and then swoop in and liberate the French people from the oppressive communist regime, by installing a puppet king loyal to the British Empire. And with that, I think it's safe to say we got revenge for the 100 Years' War. I would like to thank Paradox once again for sponsoring this video. The game will be free this weekend, so if you enjoyed this video, I highly recommend you check it out. And as always, I want to say thank you to my Patreons for throwing me money, and thank you for watching.